is the Nutrimedical Report. This is Tim Alexander, Earl Sterling, in for Dr. Deagle. I'm normally on at this time, but Dr. Deagle is not here today, and Chris won't be here, so I have an hour, and there's a lot of breaking news I have to cover. The Ukraine has closed 8 border crossings on reports of Russian troop movements across the border. This is not a large-scale Russian invasion, but there have been multiple sightings of Russian our forces entering from Russia, whether they're Russian or Ukrainians going back in some cases driving armored vehicles. In other cases, driving trucks with heavy machine guns mounted on them and so forth. There's also a report that a group that Russia used in Chechnya to fight the extremists there has been reconstituted and is being sent in eastern Ukraine across the border. These are very tough, battle-hardened soldiers that fought the extremists, the Muslim extremists in Chechnya, and it appears that Putin is sending them in. Now, Putin has seen the trap that's been set for him in the Ukraine. In other words, if he goes in, he ties Russian forces down, and there currently are large NATO and U.S. in the case of Israel and in Jordan, NATO forces operating on the border of Syria, both in Jordan and in Israel. There's a theory that I happen to subscribe to, by the way, that the Russian forces being tied down may prevent Russia from offering a response to an all-out NATO invasion of Syria. Now, it won't be called an invasion. It'll be called a humanitarian exercise or some other nonsense, but in reality it will be an invasion. In the last year and a half, on 2 different occasions, Russia prevented a major General Eastern War from breaking out. The first time was a proposed joint U.S.-Israeli attack on Iran, and Russia let it know that it would not tolerate that, sent some military forces, beefed up the Syrian military. And the second time was when supposedly we were using the issue of Syrian chemical warfare arsenals as a trigger or as an excuse to go into Syria. And at that point in time, this Russian Navy with several very large warships steamed into the Mediterranean, the Eastern Med, right off the shores of Israel and Syria and Lebanon. And the United States decided to back away at that time. So part of what is happening in Ukraine is an attempt to tie down Russian forces and to create an opportunity to get a general war in the Middle East going. That is, by the way, absolutely insane. The Iranians, Dr. Bill and I have talked about this on the show before, but the Iranians, when the Soviet Union fell, went in and offered high-paying jobs to a large number of scientists working in what was called Biopreparapat, which was the Soviet Advanced Biological Warfare Program. There are 3 main forms of global strategic warfare. Scalar warfare, which most people know very little about, and a lot of which is based on the works of the late Nikola Tesla. Advanced biological warfare, which most people have a very very limited understanding of. And then global thermonuclear warfare. And even there, most people, their level of understanding stops at about the mid-60s. In terms of advanced biological warfare, if you say biowar, to most people they think of powdered anthrax or something like that. That's basically your grandfather's biowar. Advanced biological warfare is recombinant DNA genetic engineering technologies, where they take snippets of DNA from various viruses, combine them to create a brand new virus, or take an existing virus, which is not particularly lethal or not lethal to humans, add some snippets from some viruses and change the virus into a deadly biowar weapon. Now, the Iranians have a massive biowar complex. There have been stories a year and a half ago in British papers of various groups in Africa complaining about the large number of primates being shipped to Iran, particularly, in some endangered species of apes and monkeys. They're being shipped there for testing because the primates are much closer to humans than lab rats or whatever. And they're testing various agents, viral agents, on these primates. Now, and by the way, it has just come out this week, within the last couple days, that Israel is now stationing 3 of its very expensive, very high-tech German-manufactured submarines. They're conventionally powered off of the Iranian coast in the Persian Gulf. Now, these subs can launch cruise missiles with nuclear warheads, and 3 subs would have enough cruise missiles with thermonuclear warheads to take out every major city in Iran. The Iranians will not allow themselves or their ally Syria to be destroyed. And if push comes to shove, they can push back. Now, of course, if Israel cuts loose with its nuclear arsenal, in effect, Iran will cease to exist. There won't be, certainly in the city areas, there won't be enough living to bury the dead. But Iran will be able to respond in kind, not with nuclear warheads, but with advanced biological warheads. She also is highly apt in that case to respond against North America and Europe. In other words, the NATO countries, the United States, Canada, UK, France, Germany, etc. If you want to know what advanced biowar is like, the closest thing historically is the Black Death, the bubonic plague of the Middle Ages in Europe. That was not actually a virus. It was a bacteria, and it killed between a third and half of the European population. People would come down with the disease, or at least notice they had the disease in the morning. By night, they were dead. And in many cases, they simply sewed themselves up into a burial shroud. And they were mass burnings of bodies and carts going around, bring out your dead, bring out your dead. It was a horrific nightmare. That was essentially how a natural disease. If we get into advanced biowar nightmare scenario, it literally will be a nightmare from hell. There won't be one virus. There could be 50 or 100 released. So the war that people are pushing and working towards is a war that is apt to wipe out most of the human race. We'll try not to be quite so scary in the next segment.
If you're going to take just one natural supplement, why not 7-in-1? That's Cardovite, a 7-in-1 tonic for life from Nutrimedical.com. Cardovite contains 7 synergistic herbs to promote maximum wellness for your heart and whole body. Take Cardovite to detoxify, rejuvenate,
of education since 1988. Herbal Healer Academy.
The nation's largest independently owned and operated talk radio network. The Genesis Communications Network. GCN.
Welcome back to the Nutrimedical Report. This is Tim Alexander. Okay, I want to finish up on some of the latest European news, the Ukrainian war. There appears to be what some sources are calling a rebel breakthrough. I don't think I really like the term rebel, but the pro-Russian separatist forces have been seizing border crossings. And what this is doing is allowing Russia to feed across a large number of volunteers. Some are Russian citizens, some are former Ukrainian citizens in the now independent parts of the Ukraine. They're also sending in more sophisticated weaponry. They've shot down 4 helicopters in the last 2 days, and at least a couple have been the Hind 24D models. The Russians, and before that the Soviets, had a different approach to attack helicopters than the West did. They used a combination of a transport helicopter and an attack helicopter. That was the Hind 24D. It's a very tough helicopter. It can fire a lot of anti-tank, anti-personnel missiles. It has a 23-millimeter chin-mounted automatic Gatling gun. It's pretty tough, but all helicopters, because they're fairly slow and sometimes hover in battle to engage the enemy more precisely, they tend to be sitting ducks. And that's one of the reasons that you have an Air Force and not just helicopter-borne forces to support your troops. Jets come in very fast. They have all kind of ordnance they can deliver, but they deliver it at several hundred miles an hour. Now, it appears that Vladimir Putin's strategy is, at this point, is to avoid the trap of getting involved in an all-out invasion, but to send in irregular forces, so-called volunteers, to send in increasingly sophisticated weaponry. Later this month, there'll be a large NATO force operating in the western Ukraine, perhaps in the eastern Ukraine. That is just a script for absolute disaster while a civil war is going on in the Ukraine. And it appears with every passing day that the war that's actually going on in the Ukraine is getting worse. The Ukrainian junta forces are violating international law right and left. They have shelled several hospitals with both artillery and mortar fire, including a children's hospital. The most recent horrific thing, basically yesterday, they not only shelled a hospital, but then their forces came in, their ground forces came in, went into the hospital, and killed an estimated 25 wounded separatist fighters. Literally went in and shot them at point-blank range. Now, that's a war crime under international law. And, as horrific as war is, the various nations over the last few centuries, the various nations that basically have engaged in war, have put some limits, some parameters on what can and can't be done. For instance, you're not allowed to use what's called dum-dum shells or hollow point ammunition. The Ukrainian forces have been using that. That's a violation. You don't attack ambulances. You don't kill the wounded. You don't attack civilians. Certainly not hospitals. That's a violation of various treaties and international law. The fascist forces under the Ukrainian junta have been violating all that, and fairly consistently. I think part of it is they're trying to gloat Putin and trying to put pressure on Putin from his own people to come in. They clearly want Putin to invade, to tie him down. So far, Putin is avoiding that. By the way, Putin and President Obama and many other leaders today are in Normandy. The big D-Day celebration is tomorrow, 70 years after the invasion. But today and tomorrow, many of the world's leaders, European and American, Canadian leaders, will be and are in Normandy. It's hard to believe 70 years, but my parents' generation that fought the Second World War, most are gone now, and especially the men, but even most of the women, but especially the men. Very few of the many, over 150,000 troops that invaded on June 6th, 70 years ago, are alive. And of those that are there, there's several hundred that are still there. Many are in wheelchairs, and they're in their late 80s or 90s, but many have flown over to make one last visit. When you look at the European wars that we have seen, and there have been three really major wars. The first was the Napoleonic Wars, which was kind of a world war in beta testing. Then the Great Wars, it was called, the First World War, and then the Second World War. The same people, their same group of people, their descendants are behind this, and that's the global banking cartel families. They profit from getting the Goy or the Gentile to kill the Gentile, financing both sides, and they've been doing that now for over 200 years and very successfully. They usually back both sides, and they ensure that the victor makes the loser honor their agreements with the banks to pay the banks off. And, it just, when you look at the enormous death, suffering, destruction that has taken place in the world and in Europe, for almost 200 years now. It's just unbelievable. And now we're going down that path again. But what is very different now than the Second World War, the First World War, the Napoleonic Wars, we now have the ability to basically wipe out all higher forms of life on this planet. And again, getting back to the three global strategic forms of warfare: nuclear, advanced biological, and cellular. We have what's called a MAD, mutually assured destruction, with countries like Russia, China, Iran, and so forth. You have to be insane to provoke a war that will kill you, even if you can kill your enemy. That doesn't make sense. Okay, when we come back, we're going to kind of get off the war thing and look at some other breaking news issues.
Premier Independent Talk Radio Network, the Genesis Communications Network, GCN.
The Nutrimedical Report Show. talking about really depressing things in terms of where we may be going with this Ukrainian war. Now let's talk about something else that's not real upbeat. The trouble is, if you do the news today and you're honest as opposed to the mainstream media, which is basically 96% owned by 6 companies, all globalists owned and Zionists ran, we're at the point where the mainstream media today is very similar to what it was in the Soviet Union during the height of communism. It's all propaganda. It's all lies. It's all spin. Well, that's what we've got right now. But we do have the Internet. We do have talk radio. They haven't shut us down yet. And those of us in the alternative media are making a big effort to try to get some truth out. I don't make any money at this. I just get more entries on my national security and FBI file for daring to criticize Obama and the jerks running the country. Well, okay, I can live with that. Anyway, let's talk about what's happening economically to this country. We're being destroyed. Right now, half the country makes less than $27,520 a year. That's not much money, particularly for a family. And I've linked an article here. It's really good. Half the country makes less than $27,520 a year, and 15 other signs that the middle class is dying. Now, let's go through a few of the signs. According to a brand new CNN poll, 59% of Americans believe it's become impossible for most people to achieve the American dream. And that's sad. In reality, to some extent, it's sad that only 59%, because it's pretty obvious it's in your face. But young adults aged 18 to 34 are most likely to feel the dream is unaffordable, with 63% saying it's impossible. Many of these people have never experienced a period of good employment. I teach at the college level, and I ask my students, guys, if you really worked at it and went out, could you find a 40-hour-a-week job at $10 an hour? And most of them say no. And try to live off $400 a week, particularly if you have a family, if you're trying to buy a house, get a couple cars, you and your wife, and so forth. There's not enough money to do that. And yet most can't even get that level of a job. And I'm here in the American Midwest. It's always been a great place to live. But more and more, I don't think there are very many great places to live in America unless you're extremely wealthy. Number 2 on the hit parade here. More Americans than ever believe that home ownership is not a key to long-term wealth and prosperity. This goes back to the great American dream is dying. We had a period where the banksters went amok with financing homes, particularly in areas like California, for people that did not qualify. They were, in many cases, were illegal aliens. They had no documentation, no money to speak of, and yet they were given loans on homes costing $100,000, $200,000, $300,000, given enough money down to make payments for a few months, and then everything went belly up. That's fraud, and it's fraud on a massive scale. But nobody on Wall Street, none of the too big to fail bankers went to prison for it. Heck, most of them were never even called before a grand jury. And that's things like that are deliberate. And any banker throughout history can tell you don't make loans to people that aren't employed and don't have any money in the bank. You don't make a couple $100,000 loan to them. It's not going to work. You don't have to be a genius to figure that out. But yet we were making loans like that by the millions. Number 3, overall, the rate of home ownership in the United States has fallen for 8 years in a row, and now it's dropped to the lowest level in 19 years. You have to keep in mind, every year the population grows, so the rate of home ownership should be growing every year just to stay even. And if home ownership, it's not an abstract thing. It's human beings, people like you and me, wanting to own the home that they're in. We're not necessarily talking about a great big mansion. It could be just a small house with a yard. But that's the American dream. I remember flying back from Russia one time. After my late wife died, I had this beautiful blonde Russian girlfriend for a while, went over to see her. I'm flying back, and I'm sitting by several Russian guys. And as we come into New York City, they look out, and we're flying low, and they can see all these suburban homes. It was JFK Airport, it's that area. There are some areas that, are typical suburban towns. And one guy said, homes, suburban homes, or something to that effect, because you see mostly apartments in Russia. That was the communist way. And, increasingly we seem to be going down a rabbit hole heading towards fascism and communism, something horrific all mixed up. Let's go to number 4. 52% of Americans cannot even afford the house that they're living in right now. Well, believe me, sometimes I know that feeling. It's expensive to keep a house up. Every 15, 20 years, you're probably going to need a new roof. The way appliances are made now with my house lessons, you're lucky. You get 15 years, you might only get 12 or 10 out of a $2,000 refrigerator. Stoves, all that central air, heating, it all has to be replaced. You occasionally have plumbing bills, et cetera, et cetera. This takes money. And when you're literally on the edge and there's no money left over at the end of the week or the month, it's very difficult. Very difficult. And so a majority of Americans in the home they're in right now, they really can't afford it because things economically have been going down, getting worse. Now, number 5, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, only 36% of Americans under the age of 35 own a home. That's the lowest level that has ever been measured in the history of the American Republic. Let me go through that again. Only 36% of Americans under 35 own a home. That's a very telling thing. Those are the people that should be, at that age, should be having children. I grew up in the American Midwest in Evansville, Indiana. My mother didn't work. My father was a small businessman. Our one grandmother lived with us. There are 3 kids. We didn't lock our doors. My wife lived in a rural area, and their back door didn't even have a lock on it, Yet we all lived well. We always had a fairly new car and another car. Once I got old enough to drive, my sister and brother, we got used cars that my dad bought for us. We lived pretty well. We ate steak whenever we wanted to eat it, and we took a vacation every year. We weren't rich. We were middle class. Maybe eventually upper middle class, but middle class. And that meant a lot, and we were lucky. America is a very rich country, and only through incredible thievery and corruption have we got to the point where we're at now. Because, quite frankly, our streets should be paved with gold. We're coming back in a
Network GCN.
And this is Tim Alexander, Howard Sterling, in for Dr. Bill Deagle. I want to continue with this list because it's really important. Number 6, right now, approximately 1 out of every 6 men in the United States that are in their prime working years, that's 25 to 54, do not have a job. Number 7, the labor force participation rate for Americans from the age of 25 to the age of 29 has fallen to an all-time record low, and that's going back to 1776, folks. Number 8, the number of working-age Americans not employed has increased by 27 million since the year 2000. Depending on the statistic, by the way, there's something like up to 103 million working-age Americans that are unemployed or don't have full-time jobs right now. And that is shocking. This is not a recession. It's not a recovery from a recession. This is a major global depression. And I'll get to that in a minute. Number 8, the number of working-age Americans that are not employed has increased by 27% since the year 2000. Number 9, according to the government's own numbers, about 20% of the families in the entire country do not have a single member that's employed at this point. 20%, there's nobody in the entire family working. That's bad. Number 10, this may sound crazy, but 25% of all American adults do not even have a single penny saved up for retirement. Well, it doesn't sound crazy. If you're barely surviving and one or more of the breadwinners in the family is unemployed or working part-time at Wally World or Mickey D's, you can't save anything. You're just barely keeping your nose above water. And that's what should be the richest country on earth. Number 11, as I noticed in one recent article, total consumer credit in the United States has increased by 22% over the past 3 years. And 56% of all Americans have subprime credit at this point. In other words, well over half of us are subprime in our credit rating. People are still loading up credit cards just to be able to have bare necessities, things like food, medical, et cetera. Number 10, major retailers are shutting down stores at the fastest pace since the collapse of Lehman Brothers, and this is where I was going to go to a minute ago. The collapse of Lehman Brothers was the beginning of the Great Depression. Now, the Federal Reserve System, which is privately owned mostly by Europeans, the Lehman and a handful of families, 8 families, 30 families, if you want to take it a little bit further down, but they control the Federal Reserve System. And they have been pumping money into the stock market by the billions and billions every single month. So, some people, the stock market's good. We're not in a depression. We're not in a recession. Everything's good. No, those are false figures, and it's funny money. The reality is that you have all these people unemployed and underemployed, and human lives are being destroyed because the vultures at the top have led us into another depression. Number 13, it's hard to believe, but more than 1 out of every 5 children is living in poverty in 2014. It's over 1 out of every 5 children in the United States is in poverty. We shouldn't have any of that. And 1 out of 5? What in God's name is going on in this country that we allow these political crooks in Washington to ruin everything for us? 14. According to one recent report, there are 49 million Americans that are dealing with food insecurity right now. In other words, 49 million people not sure where they're going to get their next meal or if they can make it through the week or the month. I volunteered in food shelters before, or food soup kitchens, and it makes you feel good to do some volunteer work like that. But it's really sad, and especially sad when you see families coming in. And these are people with kids, and the economy's gotten bad. They've been laid off. There aren't jobs out there, and they're coming in with their children for a free meal. That's heartbreaking to see. Much less can you imagine what it would be like if it's your children that you're taking to a food bank just to get food, or taking someplace just to get some free clothes from somebody because you can't provide for them. 15. Overall, the U.S. poverty rate is up more than 30% since 1966 in LBJ's War on Poverty. It's terrible. And what's gone with that is our culture has been turned upside down. There's been a colossal shift in American values since 2001. Let me read off some differences here. Here's a few examples, and this is from a Gallup poll, Annual Values and Beliefs Survey results for 2014. Now, when you compare the numbers from 2001 to 2014, the difference is quite striking. And here's a few examples. Those that approve of sex between an unmarried man and woman, 2001, 53%, 2014, 66%. Divorce. Those that approve of divorce, 59% in 2001, 69% in 2014. Having a child, having a baby outside of marriage. In 2001, 45% said it was okay. In 2014, 58% said it's okay. Gay or lesbian relations. In 2001, 40% said it was okay. 2014, 58% said it's okay. Medical research using stem cells from human embryos. That's aborted human embryos, by the way. 2001, 52% sadly said it was okay. In 2014, 65%. Let me tell you, when my wife was dying of ovarian cancer, I would have gladly traded my life for hers. But we told the doctor we didn't want any experimental drugs that came from aborted human embryos and from stem cells from aborted human embryos. If you're facing your demise or the demise of your spouse, you really want to start thinking about something like that. Say, hold it, I don't want to go meeting my maker having used something from aborted babies. Pornography, 2001, 30% said it was all right. 2014, 33%. Suicide, 2001, 13% said it was okay. That must be still 19% in 2014. Cloning humans, 2000, playing God, basically. Only 7% in 2001, 13% in 2014. But even well beyond that, as I started to say earlier, when I was a kid in the American Midwest, we didn't lock our doors. And I remember living more in town as a kid. We had a milkman. This is back, I'm 63 years old, but you had a milkman that came around and delivered dairy products. And our side door was unlocked because the milkman would come in between 5 and 6 a.m. a couple days a week. You'd leave a little note for him and some money, and maybe you wanted a quart of ice cream or, half a gallon of milk or something. And he'd make change and leave it and put the ice cream in the little freezer and the milk in your refrigerator. The meter reader for the gas company would come in once a month. He'd open the door and yell, "Meter reader!" And he'd walk in the kitchen, walk down in the cellar, read the meter, walk back out. Now, he wouldn't last a single day doing that today because somebody would blast him away. We've become very paranoid, and for good reasons. There are people that are on heroin, crack cocaine, meth, and all this crazy stuff, and they have to come up with literally hundreds and hundreds of dollars every week for their drugs, and they'll do anything. We didn't have that back in the 50s and the 60s. Going back even further, in my late father's day, before air conditioning, people would sometimes go to public parks in the middle of July and August with a couple sheets and lay out in the open because it was cooler. Try that today, you'd wake up with your throat slit. We're going down the tubes, morally, economically, politically, and we have to fight back. Get right with God, folks. Time is short. God loves you. God bless.